In quanto?
Questo deve parlare lei. Se manovra qui, non le mani accette.
Buongiorno, mi sentite? Buongiorno, sono Patricia Thomas, lavoro per Associated Press Television e voi siete tutti studenti del Global Governance di Tor Vergata? E conoscete Gustavo Piga? E come questo Gustavo Piga? Era mio marito per 25 anni, poi ve lo dico che conosco meglio io. Ed è un...
Sono anche English speaking.
Ah, ok. Ma facciamo in inglese?
Sì, in inglese. Loro
Okay, I've been told I'm supposed to speak in English, but I think you all understood me when I spoke in Italian, right? Anyway, Gustavo's a great person, total respect. We're just not married anymore. Anyway, I was invited here to talk about my work as a journalist for Associated Press and how we choose the news stories and how we choose what makes the top news story of a day. Unfortunately, I'm a little bit unprepared because we've been really busy because the top story for us today is what's likely going to be the tapping of Giorgia Meloni to form a government and officially become the first woman prime minister of Italy, a young woman, a woman who comes from the extreme right, from a party that has post-fascist roots, a woman that's going to take Italy in a whole different direction, but a woman who has shown incredible strength in the past few days, standing up to Silvio Berlusconi, who's behaved in some of his usual ways, gaffes and purposeful jokes and misleading things, trying to confuse matters. Anyway, I was told to talk about how we choose the news, what makes a top story. And unfortunately, even in an international news agency like the Associated Press, which was started in the United States, it is pretty much where you live that influences what you think is important. So we have huge bureaus in New York and Washington. We have a huge bureau in London, and we have smaller bureaus in, we have Moscow and we have all over the world. But often, to this very day, it's influenced by the fact that we have more people in such and such a bureau. So for example, we have a huge bureau in London, and all day yesterday, they were sending messages to the Rome bureau saying, we need reaction to Liz Truss. She's gonna resign. And today, Liz Truss is resigning. How is it being covered in Italy? Please get reaction to that. Well, the reaction to that is nobody cares in Italy right now about that. Everybody cares about Giorgia Meloni and the Italian government. I mean, everything is sort of colored by where you're living. Anyway, nevertheless, the Italian story is a top story. The UK story is a top story. There's lots of other top stories right now. The Chinese Party Congress. AP has made a priority now for this year. Our boss has made a priority of looking into climate change, questions of democracy, should be of great interest to all of you. Democracy in the world, where democracy is going, democratic values, are they slipping away? I think the January 6th event in the United States scared a lot of Americans, and so suddenly there's this great interest in looking at what democracy is and how fragile it is and how one needs to fight to maintain it. So democracy, climate change, how the world has changed with the COVID pandemic, globalization, and the question of China. China is also a huge issue for Associated Press and for the whole world. The other issue is Africa. Africa has often just sort of been pushed on the back burner, not gotten the media attention it deserves. The media is a business, and so what earns money? Well, nobody's interested in stories coming out of the Congo, so people stop doing them. AP is trying to change that. We're boosting all our bureaus in Africa. We've gotten some grants to do more reporting on certain issues in Africa, like immigration and climate change, and I hope that will continue in that direction. I am also a member of the Foreign Press Association in Rome, a former president, and we just came out with a documentary on our work that we haven't quite decided what we're going to do with. We just had a big showing with the Italian president, but I wanted to just show you the beginning of it so that you could see a little bit about how, there's a little bit about me working. I'll show you the sections where I'm working just so that I can show off. But I'll show you some of the other journalists. I'll just show you the beginning of it right now.
2 minutos. Después de la publicidad.
Bir koronavirüs laboratuvarına dönüşen bu ülkede.
Antonio Pelayo. La tierra sigue temblando. Fumata blanca. Habemus papam. Down here and down there.
Ha recibido a 600.000 personas entre migrantes y refugiados.
Voi siete gli occhi e le orecchie del resto del mondo sull'Italia.
Y mucho más.
Mi sento un po' in difficoltà perché mi piaceva tanto rompere le scatole alle persone dietro la telecamera.
Soy Valentina Lasraki, soy corresponsal de Televisa México.
Marcel Fedovani, Nouvel Observateur. J'ai écrit 10 livres sur l'Italie.
Trabajo para la televisión española Antena 3. Llevo 33 años en Roma como periodista fijo.
Vengo da Parigi, giornalista cinématographique, toujours dans le cinéma.
Sono corrispondente del quotidiano olandese De Telegraaf.
I've been working for Associated Press in Rome for 27 years.
Trabajo para la cadena SER, la cadena de radio más importante en España, y también para Mediaset.
I've been the Rome correspondent, The Guardian, since 2018.
Work as a freelance journalist for The Times.
Sono nata a Città del Messico, però ho passato molto più tempo in Italia che non in Messico.
I've been a member of the press club, I believe, since 1986.
Io vengo qui più o meno da 25 anni a lavorare ogni giorno. Il mio giornale viene letto da 2 milioni di persone.
Sono una giornalista turca, avevo l'idea di rimanere qui per 2 anni massimo e da 13 anni che sto qua. Era la prima cosa che mi hanno consigliato, devi essere socia di Stampa Estera.
Per noi diciamo che una seconda casa che ci accoglie, che ci riunisce nel cuore storico di Roma, vicino a Palazzo Chigi, Quirinale o Montecitorio, e che siamo tutti giornalisti stranieri da tutto il mondo.
Bielorussia, Giappone, africani, latinoamericani, europei soprattutto. Allora sia l'Italia sia il Vaticano ha un portavoce che lancia notizie, che aiuta a capire le notizie, dunque è un grande vantaggio.
La Stampa Estera in Italia esiste da 110 anni, è una delle più vecchie organizzazioni giornalistiche nel mondo.
È stato fondato nel Caffè Ferraglia su Piazza Venezia.
I convenuti hanno versato ognuno 2 lire, totali 28 lire, per le prime necessarie spese di costituzione. 14 febbraio 1912. Bellissimo.
I nostri corrispondenti della Telegraaf sono sempre stati soci. Marie Vermanen, De Telegraaf, Amsterdam. E lei viveva a via Boncompagni 93, 1917.
Dopo la rivoluzione islamica del 1979 in Iran sono andato a fare il soldato perché c'era la guerra. Adesso da 32 anni che mi trovo in Italia.
Sin da quando ero piccola mi piaceva moltissimo leggere, scrivere, sono sempre stata molto curiosa, i miei temi facevano il giro sempre della scuola.
Avevo in mente sempre di diventare o medico o pilota. Nel mio cuore sentivo che io posso diventare anche un bravo giornalista, perché io sono un tipo che non mi fermo mai. E tutti i giorni vado fuori, faccio dei servizi, praticamente ho una telecamera, un microfono, ho anche non ho 3 piedi, monopiede, faccio delle riprese, da solo faccio delle interviste, 1, 2, prova, faccio io il montaggio e poi trasmetto. Amide Massimo Minegio, Cavalco di Estera,
Ci sono i wires per le notizie dall'Italia, quindi noi possiamo avere la notizia prima che esce sul sito di ANSA, per esempio. Ci sono i giornali, ci sono le conferenze stampe, belli colleghi anche in generale, c'è il ristorante bar. È molto importante essere socio e di sentire la connessione con gli altri giornalisti a Roma. Io e i miei colleghi facciamo le cose originali che alcuni giornali italiani non toccano, soprattutto noi inglesi e americani, perché c'è un valore alto riguardo il giornalismo, un standard alto.
Autista di taxi?
Sì.
Ok. E Uber ci sta in altre parti d'Europa, ma non deve andare a
Loro guadagnano i soldi, a noi ci affamano.
Essendo agenzia e soprattutto essendo TV, dobbiamo uscire, dobbiamo esserci.
Quanti siete?
Associazione Press, agenzia stampa americana.
Sento soprattutto l'adrenalina, io faccio questo lavoro per quello, non per essere qua al computer, montare, organizzare, sì, quello si deve fare. È facile per il mondo di dimenticare certe cose, è nostra responsabilità qua in Italia, il bureau, di dire no, assolutamente questo va seguito.
Sì, l''ndrangheta è la mafia.
Okay, stop it just for a second. So that was to give you an idea of what I do often on a daily basis. I go flying out of the office with the cameraman and go cover a taxi protest or a union protest, or would go up to the Quirinale Palace to film Meloni, Berlusconi, and Salvini going up to talk with President Mattarella. We bring cameras, we bring equipment to do live. But we also do a lot more in Italy, and I'll hopefully be able to fast forward this and show you some other parts of it. We cover major breaking news events, which happen sadly a lot, like the Morandi Bridge collapsing in Genoa in the middle of August, crushing, can you remember how many people got crushed in that? Earthquakes that tend to happen in the middle of the night, and you just have to get up and run to whatever town it is and watch as the firefighters try and dig people out of it. Then there are events that we cover all the time that are like the Vatican, the popes. We have to cover, I started with John Paul II, and we have to cover everything the Pope does, because the Pope creates huge interest in the whole world. There are a lot of Catholics in the world, and there are a lot of non-Catholics in the world, but there is huge interest in the popes, Pope Francis, Ratzinger, Benedict XVI, and this Pope, John Paul II, Francis and Benedict XVI. So we have to cover everything he does when he goes out, every trip he takes. This Pope's traveled a lot. I've been all over the world with him on different stories, and we just constantly have to send news reports on what he's doing, what he's saying. He speaks now almost every week about the war in Ukraine. He says things about Putin. He says things you know, whatever it is, there's a lot of interest in the Pope. So we do a huge amount on the Pope. And as you can see from this documentary, one of the most important Vatican journalists is Valentina, not her, Alzaraki from Mexico, has been covering the Pope, I think, since she was age 26 with John Paul II. So that's a huge job for us in Rome. And in terms of what makes the top story, popes almost always do. Then when one dies and there's a conclave, that's huge news. Not quite as huge as when the Queen dies. That was something. But when John Paul II died, you know, basically the whole country of Poland came into Rome and stood in lines like for the Queen to see his body. And at the Vatican, they do open casket. And it was really strange because, you know, he was there for days and people were standing, you know, 12 hours in line just to get in front of Pope John Paul II's body in the casket. And then they were just taking a cell phone picture, which was something that was weird for me to see, but you never know what people are going to do. Anyway, let me see if I can I want to be able to have time to take your questions, but I wanted to fast forward to the part where, in this part, where did that man go who was helping me? I don't know if I can fast forward this to the parts where you see I talk about some of the other work I do. The other thing that I wanted to talk to you about today, I don't know how many of you are interested in becoming journalists, but if you are, don't think you can become one kind of journalist, like I'm going to write for a magazine, or I'm going to be a photographer, or I'm going to do video stuff. You have to be able, in this day and age, to do absolutely everything. You have to be able to write, you have to be able to do radio reporting, you have to be able to take photos, you have to be able to shoot video and shoot it properly. Now you might be, I mean, now with the phones they have, you can almost all do it on your phones, but you have to be able to do everything. Nobody is superior to one thing or another. I mean, some people have more talented as a writer and some are more talented as visuals. But if you want to work in this day and age in journalism, you got to be able to do it all. So that's just a little advice. And let me see if I can fast forward this.
Más poderosa de Italia. Se podría decir que es la cuarta empresa de Italia y probablemente la que más filiales tiene por el mundo. Australia, Canadá, Bélgica, Holanda y también España. Aquí en Roma no solo hay pequeños grupúsculos criminales, la mafia está introducida en el corazón de la ciudad.
Questi qua sono i volumi della commissione P2. Quello che mi ha interessato di più è stato l'aspetto
interessante che una signora
estuviera sentado el presidente Trump y no hubiera cámaras.
Di lui come uno si metteva a parlare per Veltroni, che
il mio gusto è ancora creato nel
elbows on something so you can...
Giornalista veterana spagnola.
This is a little part coming up about covering Obama and Pope Francis.
E lì mi aveva detto: Marina, cercati un altro sogno perché i corrispondenti non ci saranno più. Io ti ringrazio tanto, poi appena esce l'articolo te lo faccio arrivare. Se non ci fosse una sede della Stampa estera sarebbe complicatissimo per noi, magari i più giovani che collaboriamo con diverse testate, quindi non abbiamo un ufficio, in un modo molto più precario. Però comunque ce l'abbiamo fatta. Mi ricordo benissimo la settimana dove si votava il nuovo Presidente della Repubblica Italiana.
Viva la Repubblica, viva l'Italia!
Io ho vissuto il giornalismo vero, anche con i giornalisti italiani che mi davano una mano.
Grande momento della mia vita. I got to go to do the Oval Office. That's me! You know, and nowadays everybody's got to do everything. So I just had a little camera with no tripod. You got to rest your elbows on something so you can provide yourself some stability under a tripod. So I immediately ran in. I tried to get in first, and I got on my knees behind the couch in the Oval Office, just like that. And Obama turns and he looks at me like that. But see my arms, it's a very good tripod. So, and even the Pope was looking at me. What the heck is she doing over there? Ho raccontato tutto questo in inglese? Sì. In questi anni la cosa più importante del mio lavoro sono stati i migranti e stare al porto di Catania, intervistare i migranti appena arrivati, raccontare le loro storie, stare lì vicino a loro, toccarli. Lì che io imparo dalle persone, e questa è la cosa che adoro di questo lavoro. Non mi mettere dietro a scrivere al computer, mi metti lì dove si può interagire, capire e stare con le persone.
I'm so happy.
You're happy that you're here now?
Yeah. Because in my country there's no peace.
È difficile non essere molto coinvolto nelle storie che facciamo. I migranti morti, i corpi che abbiamo visto a Lampedusa. Ti rompe il cuore, ma lo devi fare, le devi far vedere. Recentemente ho fatto una grande storia sui migranti che arrivavano nelle barche a vela in Calabria, lavorando un po' con i colleghi in Turchia, in Grecia per capire la rotta che usavano, quanto pagavano. Abbiamo trovato un afghano che mi ha dato il video, c'erano passaporti strappati, vestiti.
I can't live in Kabul.
Era lì, abbiamo filmato tutto.
3 months we were in travel.
Un servizio che va con scritto, foto, video in tutto il mondo.
Il premio.
Ok, quello era solo per farvi vedere, solo to show you, sorry, I didn't speak in English, some of the things I was saying earlier. You might think you're journalists going to the White House. I'm going to the White House, I'm going to be with Obama, and I'm going to be with the Pope, and I'm so cool. Well, you're not so cool. You have to be really humble when you're a journalist. So I was working with a cameraman, and they had this big event with speeches in the Rose Garden. And then the press guy from the Vatican said, they're going to let a very few people into the Oval Office when Obama and the Pope meet. And so the cameraman turned to me and he said, I have to stay here and finish, filming this whole and the group that had to go into the Oval Office had to leave the event. And the cameraman I was working with said, no, Tricia, I have to stay here until the end of this event. So you go, and we had this little handy cam, and he said, but whatever you do, don't go all shaky with the handy cam, rest your elbows on something, create a tripod. So before we went into the Oval Office, this woman who worked for the White House said, all of you who are going to the Oval Office, do not touch the furniture. Do not steal the pens off the president's table. Do not sit on the pillows. Just go in there. You have 5 minutes, get what you need, and we're getting out of there. And the first thing I wasn't listening to her, I was just thinking, oh God, I have to rest on something. I have to do a little tripod for this camera so it's steady. So I ran in, got on my knees behind the couch and rested, as I said in the video, my elbows on the couch, and Obama was looking at me like, but then he smiled. So if Obama smiles at you that great, I was so happy. And then the Pope kind of looked at me. Anyway, I got the shot and it went all over the world, and I was pretty happy. So I think it's really important that you have to be humble. You have to be able to get down on your knees and get the right shot and not be embarrassed to be looking pretty silly. Then in the other part of that documentary, I am a huge believer in being there. You need to be in the port. You need to be there next to the building that's just collapsed during the earthquake. In order to tell this story as a journalist, you can't just be sitting back behind your desk in an office, making a few phone calls, searching for video on Twitter or stuff. You have to be there. And it takes time to be there, and you waste time getting there. It's really frustrating when you're running to an earthquake and your boss is calling you saying, why haven't you sent anything yet? Back in the old days when I started, we actually worked with video cassettes, and we had to find satellite trucks or run to the nearest RAI office and pay $500 to send our news reports. Now it's very easy. I go everywhere with my computer and I can file it myself, but we have to get there. I'm just thinking if there's anything else I wanted to show you guys there. I think there was one more earthquake. We have another 20 minutes maybe, because I want to answer your questions as well. Let me just see if I can find this last little bit.
Sportivo l'ho creato nel 90, per 10 anni l'ho diretto e abbiamo premiato grandi atleti italiani. Questo è tutti.
La cucina
che non 2 minuti.
Questo ci abbia.
Dico.
Che
sì.
Queste giorni
Le
In Italia non capivo a quel momento lì.
Avec en tête son chef suprême, Totorina, le sanguinaire parrain de Corleone, arrêté en janvier 80.
Da quanto sono qua è stato un continuo di emergenza. Quando c'è un grande evento, il mondo vuole sapere se c'è un terremoto, dobbiamo esserci, dobbiamo essere in mezzo, dobbiamo correre.
Ho fatto 8 terremoti. L'Aquila, Matrici, immagini devastanti che ti lasciano veramente fuori. Per me è stata la cosa più dura di tutti questi anni.
Il mio primo era San Giuliano, con tutto il prima elementare, tutta la classe è finito morto schiacciato. Io mi ricordo seguendo quel funerale con le mamme che portavano le piccole bare bianche con il sacchiotto su questa collina nel caldo. Hanno pianto così tanto che usciva tutto il sale sulla faccia. Io mi sono nascosto dietro un ulivo, mi sono messo a piangere, che io ero giovane mamma. Ci sono queste storie che assolutamente vanno raccontate.
Poi abbiamo avuto.
Allora, just to go back on the thing about the earthquake, I repeat what I've already said a million times, you have to be there, you have to go. But we're also human. As I was saying there, I was a young mother. I had 3 young kids at home. Left the kids with Gustavo Piga. And he didn't like that. And I had to run off and do this. But, you know, seeing these, in that particular earthquake in San Giuliano, we got there late in the afternoon, a whole school had collapsed, the whole first grade class got crushed, and they spent the entire night trying to dig out these children, and the parents were there, and the children were all dead. Of course, the whole night that the parents are hoping they're not, and the firefighters kind of know they were, and the journalists are sort of, you know, filming and trying not to film, and it was just awful. Anyway, but we're all human, journalists are human, you have to allow yourself to cry and show your emotions. We can't be hard as rocks all the time. Anyway, that's sort of a rough summary of what I do and some of the priorities we make for news. Do any of you have any questions? Okay. Do we have a microphone?
Hi, my name is Domenico Genza, and I had it's more of a personal question. I saw all of your the stories about the earthquakes, and I imagine not all of the things that you had to report were happy and great, like the one of Barack Obama and the Pope. And my question is has it ever happened that you got to report something that was super traumatic or super sad, like the earthquake? And did it help you realize that you liked this job even more, or did it want you to stop? Was it a breaking point?
Yeah, I've never had a breaking point. I love my job. Even in the most emotional moments, I feel it's important. I get very passionately involved in it. I'm very interested in the questions of migrants. I did a big story on young Nigerian women that have been brought to Italy to be sort of shoved out on the roads as prostitutes, and were basically sold into sex slavery. I just get really into it and want to do more and more. During COVID, I went with a cameraman into a intensive care COVID unit, and we had to, it was the beginning, we were all kind of freaked out and not knowing what to do, and they dressed us all up in these goggles and helmets and things on our feet, and we looked like 2 astronauts going on the moon. And the cameraman I was working with is a big guy, and so we're standing in the middle of this COVID unit, and I think the goggles on his head were too tight, but what we were seeing was really heavy duty. I mean, people are desperate for breath, and it's scary, and you don't know if you're getting the virus all around you. And the cameraman, we're in the middle of an interview, and he's like, Patricia, yeah, boom. He just passed out, dead cold. I don't know, it was the shock of seeing it. And then all the doctors were rushing to him and dragging him out of the room. And they just told me, you just stay there, because you have to go through a whole process those days when you left a COVID unit to clean up and desanitize. And I'm just walking around this COVID unit going, oh my God, what the hell am I doing? So that was a weird day, and might have given me some doubts about my career, but it didn't. In the end, I really liked going and trying to, and I went back in other COVID units. And again, for some reason, I think it affected emotionally the cameraman more than I did. Because another time in a COVID unit, I was trying to interview a guy and I was holding the microphone and doing this whole interview, and I turned around and the cameraman was in the back of the room. I'm like, why are you filming from back there? And he's like, no, it's fine. I'm getting everything. He was just really frightened, and it's okay. Everybody deals with things differently. So, but no, one thing probably that would make me want to quit more than anything else is that journalists are damn competitive people. We're cutthroat and we're nasty with each other sometimes. And sometimes the office stuff is really, come on, can't we just help each other out here? But people really strive to get to the top in this business. Now, there's been a huge sea change in the business since I started. When I started, it was all men at the top. Sexist comments, men trying it on with you, that was kind of normal. That has really changed. Now AP has a boss, a 42-year-old woman with a young kid at home. Just a huge effort to have more inclusion within the company. I think the United States is really moving forward on questions of inclusion, and certain kinds of behavior in the office is not tolerated. I mean, still everybody's cutthroat competitive, but it's more focused on, getting the best story, getting to be able to do the best story, and not some of the other stuff that went on in the past. Anyway, there were more questions. I continue. All right, one back, one over here.
My name is Gaia Leonardi, and I have two questions. The first one is there any way you can share with us the report we're seeing right now? And the second is regarding some cases in which you are seeing something when you get very emotional, and maybe you have to start writing the article right away. And I'm wondering if you write the article instantaneously or you wait maybe some time before writing it, with the risk of your emotions getting in the way of the article.
All right, in answer to your first question, I'll give it to Gustavo and he can show it to all of you. The second question is, the problem for me is that I work for a news agency and we're 24/7 and we just have to crank it out all the time. So there isn't a lot of time. I mean, like that time I was talking about in the video, I went behind an olive tree and was weeping because I saw these, children who had died and their mothers weeping, and I could relate to it. The camera, actually, there were journalists all up and down the hillside that day. Others were crying as well, but the cameraman that I was working with, I think he had tears in his eyes. Well, he continued to do his job. I had two cameramen working with me. They both continued to do their job. We were able to deliver the story that day. You kind of have to keep on going and get it done. There are other news formats that are given more time. I don't know, say ABC News might say, okay, we'll just do the piece for our nightly newscast, or RAI or something. They might have more time to think about it, to contemplate it. Yeah, but then again, it also is a risk that you're too emotional at the moment. But again, that's why you have editors that can take the piece and sort of calm it down a bit if you're too over the top emotional. But yes, it's an issue.
Thank you.
All right, I have one in the back there.
Hi, I'm Simone Maggio, and my question is, how do you get detached from your article when you're done with it, in a sense? Like, for example, like with the migrants stories, like you've been there, and like, do you stop that story as like a job that like, do you feel like you're done and not feel the sadness anymore when like the article is done and you're ready to move on to the next one? Or do you, I don't know, talk to somebody like a therapist, or like, how do you cope with the stories you have to cover?
Basically, I think because we have to move on with our work and get on to the next story, you usually don't have time to get too bogged down in it. AP, I know, after big stories, often offers a service that they have in the United States, but you can call into this line and talk to someone about a story if you've been really hit by it. I mean, it happens. I think it happens a lot in the United States where people have to cover school shootings I mean, you know, if you have to cover, you know, a whole school, everybody getting, I would be the first one to talk to a therapist staff that, and I think it's really important, and I think companies should offer that kind of service. There's another element, though, to what you were saying. I was asked to speak at a conference on Ventottenne organized by some second immigrants and migrants. So they're now Italian citizens living here. And they said, they were very critical. I was asked to speak on a panel of journalists, and they were very critical. And they said, oh, you guys just go out there and do all of your stories about the boats arriving and the prostitution or this and that. And you're all so taking such pity. And then you don't do any follow-up stories. You don't do stories on us here, what we're doing here, and what we're doing that's positive. And I think that's true. And I think we should be much more responsible in doing that. There's an interesting case of that I need to follow up on. I went to the island of Lesbos in Greece when the Pope went to visit there. And the Pope met this man. His name is Christian Tango, I forget his last name. And he had he's from the Democratic Republic of Congo with two beautiful little daughters. And they'd been living in this camp on Lesbos for, I don't know, 18 months or something. I can't remember the exact figure. They had gotten on a boat in Turkey to get to Greece at night. And he got separated from his wife and his baby, and he got on this boat with his two daughters. They made it to Lesbos on Greece, and they never heard from the wife or anything more about the wife and child. And the Red Cross tried to help, and Sant'Egidio tried to help, but I don't know, nobody found her, nobody could figure anything out. He just was stuck there waiting and waiting with these absolutely gorgeous two little girls that were so sweet, 9 and 10, I think they were. Anyway, so AP did a story on that, and then we saw them, the Pope met with them. Anyway, the Catholic group Sant'Egidio had them brought to Rome after the Pope's visit. And I wrote to him the other day, and I said, oh, because after being at this conference where these immigrants said, you guys never follow up on anything. I said, oh, I have to follow up with Christian Tango and his daughters. So I wrote to him and I said, oh, you're in Rome, I want to see you, and I get together, I want to see your daughters. And he said, Yvonne, I'm having trouble finding work here, but my daughters are in school. Anyway, I need to follow up on that. And it's really hard because AP isn't asking me to do it. AP, you know, they move on to the next story. But that's something that journalists should take the time and effort and be responsible and do that. So it's something I need to get on top of.
Thank you. Okay, I'm Ludovico Benicelli, and first of all, I want to thank you for the time you gave us. And I have actually two questions. The first one is about the role of the journalist into the society. I mean, my question is, which should be the main characteristic, the perfect journalist? Which should be the right characteristic? Because I made this question to many colleagues of you, because that's the job I hope it will be my future. And many of them answered the impartiality. And I thought, okay, but what about for example, I think about the newspaper that are close to the political parties, the opinionist, you know? And many others says the capability to be dynamic. For example, I had an internship in the Avvenire. I don't know if you know that, and it was not dynamic at all. I mean, I was at that.
Come
office.
do an internship with AP.
Yeah, so I mean, it's pretty confused my opinion, on this job. And then the second question that somehow is also related to the first one is if you have some tips which will be the in terms of experiences of studying, which could be a good solution, a good path to take in order to do your job. Thank you.
Okay, I don't know how good I am at answering the first question. There's a lot of qualities you need to have to be a good journalist, and I probably don't have any of them. Impartial, yes. Curious. I'd say for me personally, you need a lot of determination and energy. But I think on a bigger scale, you have to have the courage to speak truth to power. You have to have the courage. As my colleague, Nicole Winfield, did once on the papal plane flying back from Chile, with Pope Francis, to say to him, excuse me, but you said you denied such and such was abused, was an abuser, a sexual abuser, and yet we have proof that he was. And that wasn't easy to say that to Pope Francis, because basically Pope Francis is a good guy, but he had overlooked something despite the evidence. And my colleague Nicole said that to him, and it's hard. And you have to be able to stand up to, wherever it is, a press conference, and say to whoever might be, all right, I was giving compliments to Obama earlier, but if you're a journalist and you're in a press conference with Obama, and maybe I admire Obama, but if he's done something that is questionable, you have to have the courage to say it. That's what journalists are there for. You're being allowed into the corridors of power. You're being allowed into these rooms and given a chance, so you better ask the tough questions. You're not there to just tell them how wonderful they are. They have their own press people doing that all the time. So I think probably that's the most important, one of the most important things that journalists have to do. The other thing is to give a voice to the poor. Give the voice to the people that don't have it. Tell the stories of the people that we might not want to really look at. I mean, one story that I think I have not done a good job on over the years in Rome is the story of the Rom families, but above all, the girls. The Rom girls in Rome are often forced into marriage at age 14 or 15, have 5 kids, never have the chance to get through schooling. I've talked to people about it, and it's really hard. You need to have someone, a girl, willing to talk to you about it, to be open about it, and that's really hard because they're minors. Anyway, so there are lots of things that I can't do, I haven't done, but you need to go and speak to give voice to the poor, the voiceless, and then speak to power. As far as career, I always say to everyone now in your generation, I said at the beginning, you have to be able to do everything. You guys already can do everything. You're far ahead with your phones. You can film, you can take pictures, you can do cool stuff on Instagram, you can do TikTok, which I don't even know how to use. You can do it all. That's all in a way of the starting forms of media. I did a blog post for years, and that was really useful for me. And I just sort of did behind the scenes with AP and wrote stuff. And it was really useful because it just got me writing and getting photos to go with my stories. Even though I was already working for AP, it was a chance for me just to develop other aspects of journalism. So even if you don't have a job, if you don't have an internship, just start doing something, write up something, go out on your street and do a story on whatever you see, you find. In Italy, it's so full of it. I mean, do a story on that bust sitting there in the wall. Who is that guy? And who made that? And why? I don't know. Just there's always something to do a story on. So write it. Put it on a blog post. Put it on a tweet. Put it on an Instagram post. Just start. That's my suggestion. Questions? Okay, there's one there.
Good morning. My name is Alexandra Joa, and I have 2 questions. First is you said that as a journalist you can just sit by the desk and write articles, but you have to be in the place where the event is happening. So I was wondering, do you remember maybe the situation when during doing your job your life was very put on the risk, endangered? And my second question is, you said also that your job, in your job, there is a lot of concurrence, that may be a bit toxic environment. And what is your tip to get through them, to stay strong and go on the top? Thank you.
All right, danger. I mean, all journalists have their war stories. So I won't bore you to mind, because they can all talk about them all day long and bore people. I've had a few. When I was 23, I just took off and went to the Philippines and tried to be a freelance journalist, and had some adventures. I got stuck in the middle of a coup attempt and went in this army headquarters that the rebels had taken over, and I was trying to get an interview with a rebel leader, and a gunfight broke out, and I had to escape into this bathroom in the headquarters and lie on the ground there for 7 hours until I crawled out. And so that was one more story. I went for a week in the mountains with the communist rebels to cover them. That wasn't as scary as I thought it would be. It was scary getting there, but then once I got in with the communist rebels in the mountains on the island of Negros, Basically, it was like being on a camping trip in the mountains or something. They weren't going to launch any battles with me there. So I was just hanging out with them and interviewing them. So that was kind of cool. Another time with AP, at the beginning, I went into Liberia together with some people from the World Food Program because there was basically a civil war underway. And WFP was trying to get food to this remote area, but each part of Liberia was controlled by different rebel groups, and they were all small groups. Anyway, we flew in on a UN plane from, I guess it was the Ivory Coast. Already the plane was scary enough. It was some old Russian Soviet plane, and it had cockroaches crawling all around it. And when I went to the bathroom, there was Cyrillic writing, and I thought if I hit flush, I was going to be ejected. So that was scary enough. Then we get there, and we had to go to this remote area and pass through all these. We were going in a four-wheel drive car, and we were followed later by trucks with food. But we were sort of going ahead to tell the rebel groups to let the trucks through because they had food. And we just kept on getting stopped by these kids, armed to the teeth and roadblocks, and they would come to the window and they were totally drugged out, and they're like, who are you? Where are you going? And the security guy from the World Food Program said, no, we have the permission of rebel leader so-and-so on the end, we're bringing food, the trucks are coming. Anyway, it was pretty freaky over the course of the, driving for how many hours, like every time these kids, and I tried a strategy of always rolling down the window of the car and trying to talk to these kids who spoke English, certain kind of English. Anyway, all right, so that was one question. So I don't want to bore you to tears. The other question was competition. I feel very strongly about this. I think women sometimes, in my career, and again, I'm a generation ahead of you guys, it was always the women that were backstabbing the other women all the time. And that drives me insane. Why can't we help each other? So my advice is help, especially women, help other women. We need all the help we can get. Do stories together, help each other, give someone else an idea, try and help them do their story. Make it happen for them, they'll make it happen for you. That said, same thing's true for men. I mean, or men and women. Let's all work together to make stories better. Let's all work together to help each other get ideas. It's not always easy because sometimes the boss will say, okay, who's gonna go on the Pope trip to wherever? Both of you wanna go, both of you, only one gets to go, someone's gotta prove they're better. It's really hard. But try and support your colleagues, try and share ideas, try and help them editing, try and fill in, try and do, sometimes, do extra shifts for someone. I don't know, try and be nice. That's not a very good answer, but I don't think it helps anyone. The backstabbing doesn't really help anyone. So many questions, I don't even know how to choose. All right, wait, we got one way in the back. I'm going to move forward this video because my colleague Antonio Palaio is stuck.
La grandissima fortuna di poter viaggiare con i papi. Io ho fatto più di 100 viaggi. E poi il conclave, no, vuol dire conclave.
Okay, we'll block it at conclave. Oh no, we got Antonio back. Wait.
Questa mischia tra moderno, antico, il fumo, le campane, i cardinali che si chiudono, che non possono uscire, questo mistero, che è un fumo bianco, fumo.
I really like Antonio. Antonio is a fantastic journalist, and he's also a priest, interesting enough. Anyway, go ahead.
Good morning. My name is Gokul. I'm a global governance second year student. I have two questions. My first question is around the narratives of a story, like different narratives of the single story, because I think that there are two sides to the same story. So how do you make sure in reporting that you're covering all sides of it? My second question is, have you ever reported in a war zone?
Well, the last one is easiest. The Liberia one was a war zone, and being in the middle of a coup attempt in the Philippines, that was a war zone. More than that, I've not been to Ukraine, and I'm not offering to go to Ukraine. AP is asking all its journalists if they want to go, if they're interested in participating in our coverage, and I don't want to go there. I'm too old. I'll let you guys go and do that. You really working in a war zone is really hard, and it has to be a personal choice. And what was the first? Sorry, what was your first half of your question? What? Sorry, I spaced it out.
My first question was regarding the different narratives of a same story. How do you make sure that you cover all sides of one story?
That's a really, really hard question. And I'm very conscious of it right now because we're all covering the story of Giorgia Meloni, who in this moment is probably being named, asked to form a government and be prime minister. Now, a lot of people say she's a fascist, and she says, I'm not a fascist, I'm post-fascist. And there's the question of the flame in her party symbol. I mean, there's a lot of things in her past, and we've seen video of her, you've probably all seen it on French TV when she was young, saying Mussolini was a great politician. So the simplest way to report that story is to emphasize that. But it's much more complicated and subtle, and her political views are extreme on many issues like LGBTQ and abortion, and one has to really make an effort not to just get stuck with that word fascist, but go on and report, leave that in there, of course, but report on all this stuff. But then she doesn't want to talk. We've been trying to get her to come to the Foreign Press Association. Associated Press has been trying to get an interview with her. She doesn't want to talk to us because she sees the media as all a bunch of leftists who don't report fairly on things. So she sees our narrative as false and wrong and biased. So we have to be careful to keep it balanced. I also know AP had a similar, very big problem in the United States with reporting on Trump. The press was seen as biased to the left, anti-Trump. At the same time, Trump was doing some outrageous things that needed to be reported on. Associated Press asked all its employees to not, because we're asked to come speak at events like this or to go on TV to comment on something. For a while during Trump, they said nobody can go on TV and comment on anything unless it's the White House correspondent or the president of AP, or you ask specifically permission, because everybody is just so sensitive across the board about how the press is playing things. Because journalists are not unbiased, and it's really easy to sort of get the narrative wrong, as we do all the time. You have to try and correct and try and do speak the truth as best as you can. But is there a truth on certain things? It's not always possible. So it's a constant job, a constant correction, a constant effort. But good question. So many. Okay, you. Methods for staying informed. Current information. Oh, accurate. Sorry. Yeah, don't read Twitter. Yeah, you have to. You can't report things. I saw that on the internet. Oh, I read that on Twitter. Oh, someone wrote that on it. No, I mean, you have to have sources that you can trust. And you have to actually not just look it up on the internet. You have to go in Italy. ANSA is the Italian news agency, like the Associated Press. So we know we can trust them. If we get it from a media source, though, it's always better to get the source ourselves. Like if you are looking at information about how many Italians died from COVID in 2020 compared to how many Italians died in 2019, just to, check the difference. You have to go to the Italian statistics agency, Istat. You have to go to places where the information is accurate. And, a lot of phone calls, a lot of talking to people, people who were there to try and get, if you're talking about numbers of boats arriving in Rocella Ionica, which is a town in Calabria, where all of a sudden all these sailboats are arriving from Turkey packed with migrants. You talk to the Red Cross there, you talk to the mayor of the town. You can't just say, oh, I saw an article in La Repubblica. So that's, I think, the best way to get accurate information. No, I would say that working in Italy is a dream job and people are dying to be here. And if you look at the Foreign Press Association, we have, between Rome and Milan, 500 members. People stay here. They stay here forever. They want to retire here. They end up living here. Reporting on Italy is fantastic because you have, as I said, you have the Vatican, you have the politics, you have the breaking news or things. But we haven't even touched on today culture. We do so much culture reporting. I was speaking at the introduction to this documentary the other night, and I said one of the most incredible moments of reporting was in Florence back in the 90s when they were renovating the David of Michelangelo, and I got to climb up on the scaffolding, and the restorers were like cleaning David's curls. So I was up there, looking down at the David of Michelangelo, watching these people. I mean, how many jobs do you get to do something like that? No, I could never complain about being in Italy. Is there anything harder about it? I mean, you have to learn the language, but Italian's a nice language to learn, easy language to learn. Italians are really nice about speaking their language. I've heard that the French are a little more snobby when people like me screw up their language, whereas the Italians are pleased if someone speaks their language. And then if I'm influenced by Italian journalists, when I got to Italy in the 90s, had a very different style than American journalists would have of writing. And their newspapers, they like to look really sophisticated and intellectual and, throw some Latin in there and quote some Roman historian. And Americans don't want that. The sort of Hemingway style is what editors in the US want. So that's a difference. Back there?
Hi, I'm Marianna. I am a student of global governance at the second year. And I have 3 questions, if they're not too much. The first one is, has it ever happened to you to write an article that was too provocative or that was found uneasy, so your boss didn't want it to release, or rewrite it and changing the whole perspective and turn it into something that didn't represent you? And at this point, how did you decide to act? The second one is, did you ever refuse to write an article about something for maybe a conflict of interest that maybe could you make right in a non-objective way, or maybe that you felt that you couldn't get that detached, like Simone asked before? The last one is that if it ever happened to you to write an article about something, believing that it was right, but then later maybe this obsession of events demonstrated that that was not the reality. Because in a lecture of university, we listened to a video of the danger of a single story. So maybe if the whole world sees an event with one perspective, I wanted to know if it happened to you too or not. That's my question. Thank you.
Okay, I'll sort of tie this all together. The short answer is basically no. I've never had any big problems with AP, with them wanting me to write a story in a different way or wanting to change my story. I've never had that happen. Or I don't think I've ever refused to do a story. I did have once a story where I kind of got into a conflict or in a weird situation, and AP backed me up. And that was at the beginning of COVID, when they were creating red zones. My youngest daughter, who was studying at the University of Padua, just wanted to stay there. She didn't want to come back to Rome. And so I just went up to visit her for the weekend. And then they announced on TV that, or they announced somehow that night, that area in Veneto was going to go in red zone and it was going to be locked down, and that no one would be able to move from there. And so as of midnight, you guys can imagine, Gustavo Piga started calling me, "Get our daughter out of there now! Get her out of there on the next train, no. So I did. I got her, and I ran to, managed to book the last train out at midnight, and, but then I'm me, and I'm like this sicko, I have to be the journalist. So I started filming her and her friends and filming people running in the train station, getting on the train, and the last train out was a local train, and people were, climbing the walls, and we were all over each other, and nobody had masks back then, so we're holding scarves over our mouths. And it was a real zoo on the train. And so I started editing the story, and I wrote it for AP anyway, and then I tweeted it, and I got destroyed on Twitter. I got trolled by everybody, and people were telling AP to fire me because I was taking someone from the red zone and bringing them into the other parts of Italy, and I was spreading COVID on this train. And by the morning, the train went all night because it was the slow train. And by the time I got to Rome in the morning, I was a mess. I was exhausted. I'm like, oh my God, they're saying on everyone's saying on Twitter I should be fired. And AP totally backed me up, and they said, no, you were there, you got out before it actually went red zone, and you were also a mother, and you behaved as a mother, and AP went with the story, and I got support on that. So that's not exactly what you're saying. I'm trying to think if there's any other story where I just said, no way, I'm not reporting on this. Or they said, you reported badly and we're killing your story. I can't. If I do think of something, I'll tell you, but for a moment, that was the only one that was controversial. So many questions. Okay.
Thank you. It's a big one, but not big, but let's say general. And I'm gonna say the question and then bring a bit of backstory. So the question is journalism only possible in democracy? And I'm asking this question thinking about the recent journalists that have been arrested in Russia and in China even before. And before you were talking about not being biased, but how couldn't a journalist be biased if they only if they're treated this way by, let's say, Russia, China, and other countries, of course? How can information be given in such a state? Thank you.
Good question. Obviously, journalism, media, open press is a fundamental part of democracy. And yes, we've seen in Russia and China and other places, journalists have great difficulty working. And not only there, in Myanmar, I don't know, there are lots of other places where journalists face enormous risks. Even right next door over here in Malta, there was Daphne Caruana Galizia, who was doing really good investigative reporting on massive corruption at the highest levels in her country, and she got blown up in a car bomb. I mean, it's outrageous. So yes, you need a democracy to make journalism work, but even in democracies, journalists come up against great risk if they're really doing their job well, and questioning those in power and making some people feel uncomfortable. Russia is a very interesting case. I know at the beginning of the war in Ukraine, when Putin started lashing out at journalists, AP had to take its journalists out of our Moscow bureau, as a lot of other international news organizations did, and sort of place them in different places in Lithuania and Dubai. And I don't know, they're not talking much about when they're going to move those people back, but it was too risky. We can't have our journalists ending up in Siberia. So it's so important. And the journalists that are trying to work in Russia are so courageous, or in China or wherever their lives are at risk, are so courageous and deserve all our support and help in any way we can.
Hi, my name is Nicoletta Karpinska, and I wanted to ask you, since you mentioned earlier that being a journalist is like working 24/7, how do you deal with it once you get back home and you just want to cut it off? Like, are you able to actually cut it off, or are you always kind of on a rush trying to maybe find something to cover or writing an article? And also, how do you cut your emotions off from whatever happens at work once you get back home, for example, with your family or just in your personal life? And the other thing I wanted to ask is, have you ever been on a break or on a holiday and something happened and you just couldn't report on it? Like, have you ever felt guilty because of it?
Yeah, I think that happens. So I was on a ski vacation once when John Paul II went into the hospital, and I just had to leave my family there and come back to Rome. He was in Gemelli. So most of the time you do come, you do go if you have to. if it's your news story and your area, your region, or something you have to cover. Other times you say no. I mean, I said that, for example, Ukraine, the AP is asking us all, do you want to go, do you want to go there? Do you want to cover? They're doing, 3-week shifts because you have to be trained to go into war zones. You have to get all the equipment. You have to, and I don't want to go. So sometimes they give you choices. As far as the family's concerned, I think I had it harder than your generation will have it, but maybe not. I don't know. I had 3 kids in 5 years, and I found it extremely difficult to keep up with my job. Agency is very demanding. Keep up with my job. So I went part-time for years, but it was sort of a weird part-time because I worked till, from 9 till 3:30 every day. And then so I could get my kids to school and be with them in the afternoon and the evening. But then it wasn't like that, because then Pope had to go on a trip and I'd go with him, or something would happen and I'd go. So it was very hard for me to separate it, but then AP gained by that because my salary was moved down. And then when I decided, okay, this isn't working, I want to go back up and get the full-time salary, I waited 10 years before they did anything on that. So it was very hard for me as a mother to do it all. The other thing is about the news. I live with this every day of my life. I can't keep up with all the news. I mean, I think when I was a kid, you could just read, I'm from Boston. You could read the Boston Globe and the New York Times at breakfast. You might listen to National Public Radio a little bit and in the car after work, and then you might watch the nightly news and maybe even a late evening news program. Now it's just coming at us all the time. And I had a subscription to The Economist, and I had to cancel that because I couldn't read it. And I feel like I need to read all the Italian newspapers to know what's going on in Italy. But then I'm trying to read the New York Times on my phone in the morning. And then I've got my mother sending me the Washington Post online. We must read this article. And I can't keep up. I don't know how to keep up. I don't know. And I do think we all need to turn off. Otherwise, you just get so overwhelmed, it all turns into mush. So I have no answer on that. There's too much news, maybe. That's the answer. I talk too much. Okay, last question.
My name is Bianca Sadri. I'm also a GG2 student. I'm also from the United States myself. I had a question regarding what have you noticed are the biggest ethical or lack thereof problems that are facing 21st journalism? And in the course of your career, if I may be more provocative here, have you noticed in any recent years a sort of leniency towards wokeism, if we will?
Leniency towards what?
Wokeism, or sort of like, yes.
That's a hard one.
Thank you.
I'm a part of the Foreign Press Association and was former president, and I found one of the biggest issues there for us is that depending on where you come from, you have a really different ethical view. So often in Italy, we get companies, organizations, museums coming to us and saying, like, a museum in Florence saying, we're going to pay for a bus of foreign press journalists to come up to Florence, and you can see this exhibit that we're just opening the museum, and then we'll give you lunch. So can you do that or can't you do that? Is that ethical? Is that not ethical? AP, no, it's not ethical. For a lot of journalists, especially freelancers, it's okay. Then there are other things that are even worse, like, come to, I don't know, this region, the region of Calabria will pay for 10 journalists from the Foreign Press Association to come down for a weekend, and we'll show you all of Calabria and feed you Calabrian food, and then want people to do reports on Calabria. AP can't do that. Other journalists at the Stampa can't do it, but some can. And when we've gotten in big fights about this at the Foreign Press Association, and some of the freelancers say, yeah, you work for Associated Press and you have a salary. So don't go pointing the finger at me that I just took a free ride. So it's delicate. So that's an ethical question. Wokeism. I think that's a big issue in the United States. And I think I'm just totally lost when it comes to this question. AP sends out so many messages. And for example, AP is very famous for its style book, telling us what style we have to use with certain things. And they sent out one recently about gender and how we refer to gender. And there were so many terms relating to gender. I can't even remember what they were. And I was totally lost. And I thought, oh my God, I can't take it. Can't we just make this simpler? I think it's a hard one. I think there has been a real push in that direction, and there's a lot of pressure in the United States to report things in a certain way, and not so much in Italy. Italy, on the other hand, kind of goes the other way in some sort of weird sexism that I spoke about at the beginning. My mind is still blown away by Silvio Berlusconi and his new young woman who now got elected to parliament and saying the things he does. Anyway, but it's Meloni will be in power, not Berlusconi's woman. Anyway, basta. Ho parlato troppo.
Patricia has been for many years the president of the foreign press in Rome. I think she deserves to be here today, and she deserves that role because you have been able to understand what her work is important to explain and to tell the Americans about the Italian policy. It's very difficult to be able to interpret the Italian policy, and I think she's doing a beautiful and fantastic job. So thank you very much.